if the world collapses into World War III, I won't really care about whether I can post my ass on Instagram or not.
Welcome to Crash, the technology podcast about everything else. Today, that is safeguarding the human in the time of artificial intelligence, safeguarding the content creator in the time of shadow banning, and safeguarding rogue nations in the age of sanctions and trying to get around them. I'm Alex Hudson.
And I'm Chris Stokel-Walker. Alex, I'm in another hotel.
Where are you? Why are you there? And why have you chosen the Ibis?
Yeah, I'm in Vilnius, which is Lithuania. Always get a little bit worried about whether or not I'm going to say the wrong country there when I start it every single time. Yeah, in Lithuania for what I'm describing as a conference, but isn't a conference because they don't describe it as a conference. It's just called Login, which is like a festival,
Sounds
a
like a
jamboree.
conference.
Yes, it is. It's a conference, but they don't use the word conference, and they have quirky illustrations and stuff on their marketing material. So here to talk about fake news, which is always a fun topic of discussion, and we'll be exploring also the sights and sounds of Vilnius. I'm actually looking for some cheap RAM here in Vilnius because opening
Have
up
a
computers-
holiday. Have a holiday. Don't look for RAM on your holiday. If you're going for a talk for like one day or whatever, then how long is the rest of your stay?
I'm here till Saturday, and we're recording this
So you
on
have
Wednesday.
3 days. 3 days of holiday, and you're going to spend some of that 3 days in a new fabulous country, in a beautiful place, Lithuania. You're going to spend that time looking for RAM.
I've been here before, though, to be fair. I came here 2 years ago and spoke at this, not conference. So, yeah, I will see a lot of Lithuania.
Have you met all 617,000 residents? Have you seen all of the sites that Vilnius has got to offer? Have you seen everything that isn't RAM?
See, I saw you typing while I was talking about Vilnius, and I was wondering when the research would come in. I haven't met all 617,000. I've met probably about let's see, how many people were in the audience 2 years ago? Probably met about 3,000 of them, I would say.
Humble brag. Absolute humble brag. Love that. It sounds like you're having a better time than me. My exciting story is that the AI checker that I use to make sure that if I am writing something, it doesn't sound AI generated, showed up, which we're going to use. I've researched a Bible quote and it highlighted that as being AI generated. That was the highlight of my week. So,
we have very different lives at the minute. That makes me really angry, though, actually, when people do this on social media. When you see people running text through these AI checkers and then they see a screenshot of 100% AI generated and you go, well, you do realize these things aren't perfect, right? Because the way they work is they measure perplexity and burstiness, which is two forms of how we write sentences. This is another example, by the way, of Chris Knows Everything, where I can just kind of go on and talk about how
we don't know that Chris knows everything yet. We haven't got to that bit. This is the start of the program.
No, it's teeing us up. It's teeing us up for the future because we've already talked about this in previous episodes. So perplexity and burstiness. Perplexity, obviously, we know
also
all
referring to yourself in third person. That is what is the opposite of a very good sticker, whatever the opposite of that is. Downgrade.
Anyway, and generally AI products, they will use certain crutch phrases. Now, humans do that as well. I use interestingly too much on this podcast. Every single answer I start with, interestingly, which I should not do. But I also try and vary up my language and go into the depths of my early days reading through thesauruses and dictionaries for fun as a kid. Burstiness, slightly different. Burstiness is when you do staccato, short sentences followed by long discursive sentences. And humans are very good at that because it's what makes us unique. It's what makes us engaging. But AI, because it is just statistical pattern matching, it tends to just do the same sort of sentence length and things like that. So when you put burstiness and perplexity together, you have that inherently human language. Does mean that just sometimes some people are not particularly verbose. Some people are not particularly charismatic or varied in their language. And so they can also be seen as being AI generated, particularly when you're talking about writing, because I think writing is a much more difficult skill to do well than speaking.
Interestingly, 25% of your interestinglys will be cut out of this episode because there is an automation that does that. So, that
AI helps in every which way.
The wonderful world where language is being neutered, natural language speaking, all the ums and hisses and all of the r's are removed, which is scary. Before we start, there's an article that you saw that I am that I don't really know what to make of, and I am fascinated to find out what you think because it's a complete mindfuck. But that there is this story that AI is revolutionizing proliferation financing, short-term PF, but that means essentially the funding of weapons of mass destruction or things around weapons of mass destruction, and sanctions, particularly by states such as North Korea and Iran. So that's according to the Royal United Services Institute, or RUSI, and it feels like a complete mindfuck of, can AI get round global sanctions? Without trying to answer one of the most difficult geopolitical questions there is in like a sentence or something. Is that real? Is that happening? Are they somehow financing weapons of mass destructions using AI to get round these sanctions?
On a small scale, yeah. I mean, look, there are workarounds to all this sort of stuff. Why do you have thousands of North Koreans trying to join US companies for telework? And also giving, by the way, some Americans cash in hand to take the company laptops, load them up, start them and run them off their home networks so that it looks like they are actually being operated from within the United States. All of those things happen. Undoubtedly, there is some element of this that is kind of taking place. The extent to which I think that this is like a broad, grand conspiracy that is, defrauding us of hundreds of millions of dollars or whatever. Like, I don't think that's the case. But I think that anywhere that there is an edge, we've already seen quote unquote rogue states using these sorts of things to try and take advantage. And as AI becomes much more obliterated and uncensored, some of the kind of terminology that we're seeing for LLMs, where you take away those guardrails, becomes even easier. The RUSI report is fascinating now, which I always used to think that they were the organization that every BBC journalist went to whenever there was anything to do with defence, but actually they seem a much broader school of thought than that.
I think the RUSI paper, if you haven't seen it, do go and look at it, because it's really, really, really technically astute and really, really clever. And it's sort of that level of technology understanding and the level of expertise required in that report is directly and polar opposite to a thing that we're going to talk about in part 2 when it comes to the Pope. And having religion reporters and Vatican reporters talk about technology, that is some of the absolute scandalously bad understanding of what technology could do. I was reading this being like, this is a technology writer, right? Okay, how do they not know this? Okay, religion correspondent. Okay, you're not meant to know this, but if the Pope's writing about it, you sort of are. And I was so baffled by some of the language, which I know what that language is meant to do, and how little understanding there was of what that language was actually doing in the context where they were writing it. It was funny and sad and depressing, and then funny again, all in one thing.
Non-specialist reporters covering specialist topics is always where you realise that actually a lot of journalism is blagging. Yeah, that's the interesting thing also. Actually, this is me now getting on my high horse. Tech is seen as this thing that it's okay for other reporters to blag a lot because they think that it doesn't really count. Whereas if the roles were reversed, we would never be allowed to blag politics or things like that.
I mean, as a journalist who intersects the difference between politics and technology, I think everyone does try and blag politics to a certain extent. I think the politics news and the inner workings of Westminster journalism and politics journalism are two wildly different things. So being able to talk about the political implications of something, I'm feeling like Westminster is a pretty broad church and is pretty welcoming of. If someone tries to explain the inner workings of Westminster without doing the work to understand the sourcing of the inner workings of Westminster, that's when you get that snobbiness, and that's when you get that sort of us and them bit of Westminster. Well, we should probably go into things that we are experts in, like women's health shadow banning on social media. Nearly all charities, brands, medical educators and creators have experienced censorship and or digital suppression when posting about women's health on social media, campaigning group Censorship Research found. It's a small sample size and it's a complicated issue. It's a complicated bit of research, and shadow banning is in itself a murky business. So the act of hiding social content without telling people, and perhaps even more importantly, explaining to people why or why not things have been hidden, is one of the great mysteries of the social age. So content served to me on the algorithms assures me that it's not a shadow banning problem, it's a content problem. TikTok does not recognize the term shadow banning, instead describing it as a temporary content distribution prioritization. Instagram says similar in that it does not intentionally hide accounts without explanation and recommends creators check the account status in the app to see if there are any restrictions. But spokespeople do acknowledge a restriction of visibility if community guidelines are violated. good legal responses done early. So other networks have similar policies, but we're focusing primarily on these two. But the idea of being silenced, cancelled, or shadow banned, depending on the era, is a tale as old as time, weaponized by the right with tape over the mouth, most recently used by Stephen Yaxley Lennon, but most famously used by Hitler in the late 1920s to express his frustration at being silenced. But its history is much broader. It's not just fascist as victim cosplay. It goes back to US anti-slavery gag rules in the 1830s, 1840s, British gagging acts, propaganda in 1795, right back to John Milton's Areopagitica in the 1640s. That was a reaction to licensing laws requiring Parliament's approval before books could be printed. So it's a weapon of the populists, the protesters, the anti-establishment, the fascists, the communists, and perhaps more seriously, those suffering centuries of subjugation. And it's complicated. And if it wasn't clear already, we're not comparing feminism to the far right. We will leave that to the far right to make those ridiculous comparisons. So we're trying to untangle what is and isn't rhetoric, what is or isn't a simple business decision, and what the hell the rights of free speech are against the rights of platforms to do whatever the hell they want. We're going to try and get to the bottom of it. And so because neither of us are going to be able to answer the question, we thought, why not bring in friend of the show, Dr. Caroline Array, to answer these impossible questions. So she's an LSE fellow, a digital criminologist researching the intersection of online harms and freedom of speech, digital rights and social platforms. She's a researcher, activist, content creator, pole dancer, and every time we hang out, there's another thing that I find out about where she's done something ridiculous or won awards or did a world first something or other. So she's a busy human, and we're very lucky to have her with us. Dr. Carolina, welcome back. How are you doing?
Hello, thank you so much for having me. Well, I'm currently just trying not to boil in Costa del Hackney, but other than that, I'm fine.
So we're not going to be able to answer this question. It is a centuries-old question, but when people say shadow banning, I've got a feeling what they think they're describing and what they're actually describing and what platform. There's like 17 different definitions of shadow banning. So how do you understand shadow banning and what it means in practice?
So, as the author of what I believe is the first paper detailing how shadow banning manifests on a user's profile, I have opinions. And I do believe that a lot of people use shadow banning as a catch-all term for saying my content is not doing what I want it to do. However, the way I define shadow banning is when platforms either hide or fail to recommend content to their For You or Explore pages. So the spaces where users, and particularly content creators or activists or journalists, are likely to be discovered by others. So that is a huge thing, because if you are posting just for yourself as your own personal diary, that doesn't really matter. But if you are posting as a means of finding work or of spreading a message, and then the platform decides not to show that content to people who don't follow you, then that greatly affects your ability to grow, your ability to reach other users. And because of the murky ways in which algorithms operate, sometimes even your own followers don't see your content, because algorithms tend to work by recommending stuff that has already piqued the interest of, maybe you're following within a specific time frame. So essentially, what we're describing here is a bit of a rigged game where users who particularly try to work with platforms and are, trying to embrace the democratizing promise of social media, saying everybody can open a business, everybody can be a creator, everybody can spread a message. Well, they find themselves not being able to do that under circumstances that they don't know much about, because the platform doesn't tell them.
Then the platform does tell. So if the platform doesn't reward your content, and we're going to get into all manner of sticky language that we're going to be as precise as possible, but it's such a horrible piece of like what counts as successful. All of those things is a whole different podcast. But there's sort of every influencer I see on this, like if you're not being shadow banned, your content's just not good enough. And to an extent, the algorithm is a choice. So, you are playing with median watch times, you're playing with share engagement rates, you're playing with all of these different numbers. Isn't it just that if you're not doing what the platform wants, then there's no way through that and you have to change your types of content? And if they want to make their content reach millions of people far and wide for whatever purpose, they have to play the games the algorithms want them to play. I'm not saying that's a good thing, but isn't that just a reality that most, if not all, creators are aware of now we're in 2026?
In a way, yes, in the sense that obviously the platform will want you to use new features, will want you to use, its own native tools. And that, I think, is a problem in itself, in the sense that creators are spread thin in the attempt to please whichever platform infrastructure is out there, right? There was that time in particular when Instagram said that it would penalize videos that had the TikTok watermark because, of course, they have no personality and they have to show that everything that looks like TikTok and is done like on TikTok is, however, native for Instagram. So that is a problem in itself. But I think the issue here, particularly with shadow banning, and particularly with shadow banning of sexual health and of, anything sharing bodily expressions, it's really not technically in the guidelines what you can and can't do. Of course, it says, don't post nipples, don't share fully nude buttocks, and we can argue
Unless you're
about
Kim
whether this
Kardashian.
is unless you're Kim Kardashian. And we can argue about this until the cows come home, right? We can say whether that's right or that's wrong. And, those debates will last for ages. The issue is that it appears that platforms' understanding of what is full nudity and what is sex is different from creators' understanding. And you would argue a lot of the times also different from modern society's belief on what should and shouldn't be allowed. So, for instance, you have, in the case of censorship, they shared evidence from the Eve Appeal, sharing, a drawing of an anatomically accurate vaginal anatomy, and that was apparently sexual and not recommendable. Similarly, you have clear examples of fitness, even women wearing leggings and tops deemed non-recommendable because that is sexual. So even though, of course, there are certain things that we know are a no-no, which is why, for instance, you will not catch me posting my nipples on Instagram, there are a lot more kind of murkier types of moderation which are unspoken and unwritten. The way I kind of proved that shadow banning was happening back in 2019 when I started researching on it was that on my, at the time, fairly beginner pole dancer creator and, hobbyist account, I tracked the moderation of my content before and after FOSTA SESTA. So FOSTA SESTA is the exception to the US Section 230 of the Telecommunications Act. This section tended to protect platforms as intermediaries of communications. It rules that they weren't publishers or editors, they were just carriers. That, however, changed with FOSTA SESTA, which created this exception, making them liable for content that facilitated sex trafficking, a crime, and sex work, a job, which were incorrectly blended. My content was reaching thousands of people. I had 3,000 followers and 20,000 people were looking at my content if I looked at the analytics. And then as soon as the sex workers in my network started saying that they were being censored because of FOSTA SESTA, that slowly trickled down to pole dancers, because obviously pole dancing is an art and a sport that comes from stripping. And I noticed that quite starkly when comparing the analytics. I became an instructor. I became a professional performer. I gained so many followers. And yet somehow now, with over 30,000 followers, sometimes I get less views than I did before. Then the platform actually apologized to me and to pole dancers in general for the hiding of pole dancing hashtag, which they didn't call shadow banning, but which they did anyway. So I think there's something unwritten and something lost in translation between what the community guidelines say they do and how that is perceived by creators, but also how that is implemented by the platform, because it looks like there's been a snowballing learning of what counts as sexual and nude.
And that use of translation, I think, is really important, Carolina, right? Because it's a confluence of multiple things. It's, to Alex's point of, well, these are the rules and the rules are what we have to abide by. This is a private walled garden. Fine, yes, but actually these platforms have a really central role in our society, and also the way that these things are being implemented is in a very puritanical American way, right? Like, this is the thing that I always find fascinating about talking to you and talking about this subject is we all come from it, and our listeners generally, although they come from all around the world, have this kind of European sensibility towards nudity, although Brits are slightly more prudish on this sort of stuff. It's very different. Slightly, but less so than Americans, right? And I think this is the thing. This is, we talk about how platforms have got us all speaking with American accents in terms of like the way in which they shape our culture and our society, but it's also that unwritten rule requires you to translate those across cultures at the same time as this being the kind of, as one famous dickhead said, de facto public square, right?
That is such a good point. And, now we are, I would say, in platform and tech hell, right? Like the dream has become a nightmare. But, if we throw it back to the early 2010s, the way particularly the American platforms promoted themselves to us was as bringers of democracy, of like enabling the uprising in the Arab world, of being able to start movements, of connecting with one another and becoming friends with people across the world and starting your own business from, your bedroom. So I think you can't play it both ways. What are you? Are you a private company that just wants us to abide by your rules? And again, I don't agree, but fine. Or are you that really generative and lovely public space that you marketed yourself to us as? And I think this is where the disconnect lies, right? A lot of the regulation that platforms are really bothered about, and even I would argue a lot of their censorship, particularly against queerness, particularly against sex, comes from that puritanical American point of view.
And so, how this debate that we've had in Parliament, are you feeling vindicated by this? Are you feeling exasperated by this? Because this is something that you and many others have been talking about for ages, and suddenly now it feels like people are actually starting to pay attention, who maybe have the power, maybe, to actually change things.
So I think, first of all, this is a wonderful achievement because having these discussions in the corridors of power and having it debated lends validity to this topic that maybe wasn't there before. I don't like this because obviously, sex workers have been talking about this since time immemorial, way before me even. And they don't even get credit. So I will forever dislike that. However, I do hope that this will further raise awareness about the situation. And I think it's been an incredible feat to bring it to Parliament. Although I will say that women's health as a space, I sometimes find frustrating because there's this attempt to separate the issue from sex work. And of course, women's health is not sex work, but the censorship of each topic is rooted in very similar situations. The reason why I'm not super hopeful about this coming to Parliament is multifaceted, and it starts with the fact that once we have agreed that women's health shouldn't be censored, what do we do next, right? Because a lot of this censorship comes from snowballing censorship that started from sex work. And a lot of this censorship comes from the fact that platforms do not want to invest in a human workforce. They do not want to invest in context-related moderation. And also, they don't value women's health because they are now cozying up to the Trump administration that is reducing bodily autonomy for women. So I don't see these issues being separated from one another, which may affect the success of this. And another frustration of mine is that this is a government that is trying to have its cake and eat it, in the sense that it wants to cozy up to the tech world and it wants to show that it is open for investment from the tech world, but it doesn't want to overly scrutinize it. That I think makes the success of actions like this quite tricky, because the UK doesn't want to fully reject US techno-imperialism and doesn't want to recognize that platforms don't make for trustworthy partners.
I think there are a few follow-up questions, but it could be a coincidence that this is the sort of happening at the same time as the Growing Up in the Online World consultation closes. It could be a coincidence that it happened at the same time as Starmer and whatever the hell happens over the summer with all of the myriad of leadership contenders or non-contenders or damp squib as may be, meaning that it's a little bit of a vacuum in government, meaning that it's unlikely, despite the strong policy stuff that's come through of existing policy aspirations, this isn't necessarily one of them. So I think this could fall into a vacuum. And it works suspiciously close to the summer recess, and we're in that sort of bit of winding up of Westminster for the summer. So to all of your ambitious, it's obviously important that it's got this far, but it feels like it's falling in an early day motion. It's falling in a backbench motion. And when you talk about meaningful change or policy-based change or permanent change, it feels like there is a massive, massive gulf between those two things. Is that fair, do you think? And what would bridge that gap?
Yeah, I think that's fair in terms of the timings and the political situation. That's definitely something I'm mindful of. Also, from the debate itself, there were a lot of really heartening thoughts like, this is not something that should happen. But I think, there were some less heartening thoughts about, oh, we don't need platforms for this. We could provide proper sex education, which is still not proper though. So, where do we go with that? So I think, again, it's an issue of investment, not just in the policies themselves that, characterize the online world, but even in the offline education, which is necessary. Although I will say that the ministers involved really do have this issue very close to heart, and they are fighting really hard for it. I think, the issue is that we're about to maybe face a leadership challenge. The US might drop a bomb on anything, at any stage. Like the political and international landscape is so unpredictable that I don't know whether this will take priority, which, don't get me wrong. Like if the world collapses into World War III, I won't really care about whether I can post my ass on Instagram or not. But I think the issue here is deeper, which is in general, queer and feminized forms of labor and expression and issues always taking the backseat in conventional politics, but also just in governance, right?
So I've got a difficult question, and I think it comes from the fact that the algorithms, at least initially, were predominantly created by men. And it comes from the fact that a lot of the online spaces, rightly or wrongly, dominated by men. What counts as proof here? Because women, so in all of the studies, women engage in social, once again, not all, it's such a broad brush, and doing them as gender binaries is flawed for many reasons, but women engage in a different way than men engage online. So if you drop below the line in comment sections, it is usually, not always, but usually majority men. When you talk about blind shares, majority men. If you look at the comments and the rage baiting and the anger within the comment section, particularly across the social networks, it's men. So actually, if you look at the content that men are rewarding within that algorithm structure, it's the sort of more polarized. It's less likely to be around women's health. It's less likely to be about sort of more complicated topics that women may want to see, but they may not be feeding the algorithm in a way that the algorithm, as rudimentary as it is, might reward. Am I being too simple? Well, obviously I am being simple. It's one part of the issue, but is there a case to say that because the algorithm rewards male types of interaction, it's a fundamental problem from the beginning that is almost impossible to unravel and to solve? Or am I just making a thing out of content that doesn't quite do what it is meant to do? Or is it one of a million different things?
I think this could be one of a million of different things, in the sense that actually today I'm going to post a video on TikTok because I'm going viral on TikTok again. And as per usual, it's men. It's quite interesting because we always talk about how it's a platform loved by children, and the amount of gross comments that I'm receiving, I'm just like, why don't I go viral with the girlies, the gays, and the days? Why is it always the men?
What are you going viral with?
It's just I'm honestly even posting like shorter clips of me pole dancing because I don't want to pole dance for free for the algorithm. But it was literally like a 20-second clip, and it's just like, man, I don't know. It's very weird. Like, also, I'm doing barely anything in that video. It's not even impressive. So I've given up trying to understand what makes men tick and what makes their algorithmic preferences tick. But I think the algorithm, the algorithm rewarding male forms of engagement, maybe through conflict and through sheer grossness, could be a thing. But I think also there's something to be said about how these spaces are built, how these spaces thrive, and which spaces are allowed to thrive in the first place, right? Because there are several like more independent, smaller, femme and queer owned digital spaces that start off. But because there is a market dominance and a monopoly by certain tech companies that are being heavily regulated, that same regulation, which is meant to technically do good and like make platforms safer and whatever, that is something that only the biggest platforms can comply with and can fund for. So you see a lot of small independent platforms folding or not being able to pursue what they're doing because it's just too expensive under this current mechanism. So I think the economy itself and capitalism are very male-centered. But also, and this brings me back to regulation again, my pet peeve is that when regulation is super carceral and is not about creating a better digital society, and it's about removing rather than rehabilitating or educating or helping or connecting, this is what we see happen. This is why, again, I find it quite interesting that the same government that is pushing to ban kids from social media and that wants to heavily regulate certain types of media then complains that women's health is being shadow banned, because these are two faces of the same coin. Our digital landscape is not a welcoming digital society, it's a hellscape.
I think that's pretty clear. It's also interesting, I mean, talking about the kind of the way in which this reflects the offline world, even the debate itself, if you look at the Hudson records. So this was brought forwards for discussion by Emily Darlington, who's the Labour MP for Milton Keynes Central in Parliament. And then immediately afterwards, you have, I think it's 3 men who just kind of contribute to the debate, interrupt and things like that before Emily Darlington is allowed to continue. So it's that problem. I mean, I know, again, we started with a really difficult question. We're kind of probably going to get close to ending with one as well. But what can we do about this? Because it's so widespread, it's so long-standing, and yet it's such an important issue to try and think about.
Multi-billion-dollar question.
Yeah.
But I mean, I like how you just want
Also,
to end
sorry
on
as a
like
man asking you to solve all the problems.
It's okay. You're one of my favorite men, considering how many times you've plucked me back from TikTok obscurity every time my profile was deleted a few years ago. But yeah, something that I'm noticing at the moment is that there is a huge call to regulate social media. But once again, that regulation comes from panic. And I understand why people are panicked. I really do. Like, I myself have time limits on my apps. I'm trying to be online less. I am really reconsidering my presence on and my use of platforms. Like, don't get me wrong, there are things to panic about. But the way I think even just normal people are campaigning for and engaging with the debate about social media is remove this, remove that. And we're not talking again about how do we bring this society online. When we engage with these campaigns about social media, which are then inevitably going to feed into the populist proposals or whatever, is that we need to think about, okay, what's the fallout from the banning? Why don't we campaign for appeals and for education and for transparency as successfully as we campaign for the banning? I urge anyone jumping on the online safety bandwagon to read up about what platforms are not telling us. And instead of putting that force in the let's ban X and Y, let's put that force in tell us how you work so that we can regulate you accordingly. Because then if they tell us how they work, we can tackle the monopoly issue, we can tackle the inequality issue, we can tackle the, yes, terrible content uploaded on platforms that should never be there. But I think, it's a lot easier to say, remove children, remove porn, remove, I don't know, your crazy uncle who believes in conspiracy theories, than it is to say, make Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, whoever, tell us what it is that they're doing.
So in the theme of us asking you impossible questions and expecting you to have the answer, if you are willing, sort of a quick fire way to finish this off with near impossible questions that we can answer in one sentence or less? Are you ready?
I can try.
Okay. Is shadow banning real?
Yes, but not the way you think.
Is there any evidence to the idea like it's not the algorithm, it's your content? Your content's not good enough, and if you made good enough content, actually it would find its audience.
Well, what is good enough content, right? Like, I think that is the main issue, because if something that you used to post yesterday and that would go viral today is not going viral anymore, is it that people have decided overnight that they hate you, or is it that there has been an algorithm change? So again,
I'm
I think,
insecure enough to believe that it's the former.
Well, yeah, I mean, everybody hates you, Alex. For you, it's that. For me, I don't know. The ass is the same.
And then final quick fire question is, how much of this is bias and how much of this is just risk management from platforms?
Well, you could argue that risk management is bias, because if we decide that a certain element of the population or a certain type of content is riskier than others, then that is bias. Because why can someone in my comments say you deserve to be raped and that doesn't violate community guidelines, but my cute little ass in a thong does?
Answers to that.
This is my very academic perspective.
Email alex@crash.org.uk or chris@crash.org.uk for answers to that question. And with that, we will take a break and we'll be back with Carolina in 1 second. Welcome back from Carolina's Instagram posts to the Pope. It's a natural segue, obviously. Pope Leo XIV has written a 245 paragraph encyclical, or, posh Latin. And because we have an Italian with us, it's going to be pronounced properly. Carolina?
Magnifica Humanitas.
There we go. So it's on safeguarding the human person in the time of artificial intelligence. So he talks about disarming AI, linked it to the potential of a rise of modern slavery, and accused algorithms and those leading tech companies of brandishing a new form of power. Some of the key passages warn against the construction of yet another Tower of Babel and to join forces in building up the common good so that humanity will never lose its beauty. For reference, oh my God, this hurt when researching it this morning. The Tower of Babel is a story in the book of Genesis about building a huge city, uniting people under a single language, and completing a tower that reaches the heavens. But in response, God scattered humanity across the earth and confused their languages. And you can take it as one of 1,000 ways, but it could be used as the Bible's explanation of the many different languages, many different cultures, or that God really does value diversity. I mean, Pope Leo is using it here as an argument against monoculture. And of course, in accordance with Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 and 27, the Catholic Church teaches that all people, regardless of race, ethnicity, or background, are made in the image and likeness of God. Though it does view homosexual acts as contrary to natural law, it does not bless same-sex marriages. Transgender people have been barred from serving as godparents, and women cannot be ordained as priests. All people. Anyway, back to the AI Pope. Anthropic founder Chris Olah spoke at the Vatican City after the Pope unveiled the message. He said, every frontier AI lab, including Anthropic, operates inside a set of incentives and constraints that can sometimes conflict with doing the right thing. Carolina, because she's an expert, and not as she jokingly WhatsApp because she is Italian, has agreed to stick around. And so with that, we will continue our impossible questions. Will capitalism win, even against God?
Well, I should say, just to kind of boost my credentials for any kind of bro that wants to, come on and say how blasphemous my presence is. I am actually related to a priest. Rest in peace, my great uncle. And I did go to church school, although I gave up because they asked me to choose between God and the gym because they were at the same time. And of course, I chose gymnastics.
I don't think we have those listeners. I think we have a very inclusive, welcoming and broad church.
To your broad church. I think, what I'm liking about the situation is that while previous popes, bless them, they were a lot older than Leo. So they would make references to apps, to technology, but it would always be a throwaway comment to show that they were down with the kids, but with no actual knowledge. It seems like Leo has really engaged with the subject matter and is coming to it with a bit more of an informed perspective. There's a lot to like in what he has written, despite all the contradictions that you mentioned, Alex. I don't see the church winning this argument, although the simple fact that a lot of founders did go to try and lobby for any change in what the Pope was going to write, or like at least save face, shows that maybe they are a bit worried. So anything that worries big tech is interesting to me, but it's quite tricky to see how much of a pull the Pope will have in this situation. But it was a really interesting scenario to me, particularly because Claude was present. And I think what was interesting to me was the whole conversation about Claude asking to be scrutinized outside of a lab, maybe even from, civil society and the Pope or whatever. It seems like they're trying really hard as a PR move to portray themselves as the good guys. And that reminded me of Meta's early vibe, because I was in a lot of conversations with Meta employees, pre-Online Safety Act, pre-Digital Services Act, when Meta were still trying to portray themselves as a progressive company. And I remember in those conversations at public events organized by researchers, some of these policy people saying, oh, we would welcome regulation so that we know what to do, so that people tell us what to do, because we have legal experts, but we're still a company where we're very happy to follow the law. I love how the conversation is about how inevitable this all is, as if, we couldn't help but develop AI. So maybe that's something that needs to change rather than how people respond to the Pope.
And Chris, when the Pope talks about AI as that new form of power, is he right?
Yeah, he is right, but he's reflecting too much what the house view of Anthropic is. And this is one of the really worrying things I think Carolina has highlighted here, which is that you have Christopher Olah, one of the co-founders of Anthropic, literally on stage alongside the Pope. And this is that same scenario that we've talked about multiple times before, that Carolina has outlined there, the idea perhaps of either ethics washing or regulatory capture of either civil society or academics in order to try and shape the narrative that you want. Or, as we've seen, for instance, throughout the whole AI debate, there are a finite number of experts who can speak confidently and competently about this sort of stuff. And so what ends up happening is they invariably are attached to, allied to, or in some way linked to the major AI labs, and just so happen, by the way, to reflect what the AI views is of these sorts of things. So that to me is kind of the bit that's concerning. I mean, there was literally kind of mimicked language here. But on the other side of things, it is interesting that Anthropic is also portraying itself as being this slightly more moralistic, ethical point of view. And to the idea that the Pope can actually shape opinions of everyday people to use or not use AI, to think about how they use this technology a little bit more carefully. Not hugely convinced by that. I mean, the Pope is very significant in terms of the Catholic Church, and that numbers hundreds of millions of people worldwide. But actually, the idea that the Pope is going to get you to pick up Claude rather than ChatGPT, or to think more carefully about how you use AI, not so certain of that. But really what it is the Pope is a celebrity, right? The Pope is a totemic figure. There is the Dalai Lama, there is the Pope, there is the US President. Those are the three people who, whenever they say anything about any sort of policy in the world, you sit up and you listen to them. And so the fact that he's saying that, I think, is important.
I think the Pope gives you permission, or it gives you an excuse. So I think when it comes to LGBTQ plus rights, and a lot of people still quote the Bible and repeat what the Pope has said around their more controversial or less welcoming views around that. And I think a lot of work has been done by the Catholic Church, not in its teachings, not in directly its scripture, but just that nudging of, nod and a wink of, it's okay now. There's that a lot of that movement to gives a lot of the activists and the campaigners rights to say, actually, the Catholic Church is moving. And so it's not that people listen directly to what the Pope says, I don't think. To your point, I think he is just an incredibly famous person. It's more that actually it trickles down and it gives people a sort of evidence base. It gives people this thing that they can hold up as proof that this view is not just a minority view. Even the Pope's saying it now. It's more just, I don't know what he's doing with the House of Babel or Babel, depending on how you pronounce it. I don't know what he's doing with that. And so maybe a question to you both is, with the Babel story, which I find enthralling, because I love that he's made that reference, is AI building a dangerous monoculture, or actually is it fragmenting reality into billions of personalized little worlds? So is AI acting like the builders of the big city, or is AI acting like God?
Wow. I mean, you really went at it with the easy questions during this podcast. Love that for me. So I I don't think AI is God. I think AI makers think it's God or think they are God because they are building this world according to the data that they find, according to their worldviews, according to their funding, from very, very specific locations. So I think they think they're God. And because of where they come from, where they are based, and again, US techno-imperialism showing up, it is becoming a bit of a monoculture, but I think that is an issue in technology in general, right? Like one of the things that I've been reflecting on the most as someone who loves to travel is the standardization of the aesthetic cafe, which is showing up everywhere in the world from, I don't know, like small towns in Italy to Rio de Janeiro. And I think that's quite similar with AI, where you do get a pervasive technology made through the lens of a specific worldview and in a specific life experience. So I don't think it's God. I think its founders think they're God. And I think it is in danger of creating a monoculture while also fragmenting communities, though, because, you know, if you get all of these people that are dating LLMs or doing therapy just with ChatGPT, then, you know, there's some fragmentation going on there.
It's really interesting. I've been doing some reporting around this week. And so the Pope thing is a culmination of about 2 months now of interactions. So back in late March, they had a meeting of around about a dozen or so, 15 maybe, representatives of different religions, largely Christian initially, including lots of thinkers around this. So there were 15 people in a room over a couple of days in San Francisco in the Bay Area. I've spoken to two of the people who were in that room who talked about like what exactly they were looking for, and this is the idea that they want to try and imbue Claude's constitution, that thing where they think that it is godlike and it is godly and it is incredibly human and able to think for itself, the constitution by which it actually adheres and thinks about the world. They wanted to make sure that they were strengthening that better. And the reason why they're seeking out religious representatives is because they've come to the conclusion that this thing is so powerful in their view that actually they cannot just simply give it a basic set of rules. Like you cannot say this is good, this is bad, this is not acceptable, this is completely acceptable.
So instead, yes, religion, that's the place to find
well,
really
they said that you need to have a broader view on this, which I know is ridiculous, right? But they're kind of going, well, rather than having absolute rules, you have a kind of moral rooting in this sort of thing. Again, the extent to which we should believe this
historically, that's always gone well for all manner of different populations globally. That moral rooting in religion has gone really well.
The thing that is interesting about it, though, is that they did start out basically only talking to Christian leaders, and then actually they realised, oh no, hang on, there are a lot of other religions in the world. We better start talking to them. So that's been happening in recent weeks as well. But yeah, it's very easy to kind of make fun of this, and I think we should make fun of this. Let's be completely clear about this.
That is our role in this.
Yeah, they are trying, they are putting their foot in it an awful lot. The concern really, I think, is if actually this thing is so powerful that they believe it is, which, I personally don't think that. I think it's very good, but it is powerful. We have really bad custodians of it. If they're only thinking about this sort of stuff now, now what, 3.5 years into this generative AI revolution, that actually they might need to imbue some sort of moral core to the systems that they're developing.
That's Anthropic's whole brand, right? That Anthropic, the whole big differentiation between OpenAI is OpenAI will give you ads, OpenAI will sell your data, OpenAI will do all this stuff, and it will make questionable choices. And I think the nuances and picking between which bits of Anthropic was allowed in parts of the US military services and which parts work compared to which parts of OpenAI, if you scrutinize that really, really heavily, you get into this really nuanced detail of it's a very specific press line, and there is a difference. To be clear, there is a difference, but where the red lines aren't that far apart. And so, but it feels like it is a marketing tool that religion is on side, and they're not doing any wars things, despite the fact that Vice President Vance was perfectly fine with the Pope weighing in on AI, but not about war in Iran. Seemingly, apparently, the Pope should say stuff if it's about the future of humanity, but not about how many people are getting killed.
And also, sorry, wasn't Claude used to search for some attack-related things for the Iran war just recently?
Yeah, the reporting is that the US Department of Defense went against the request and the agreement that they had signed with Anthropic to do so, which is why there's been this huge controversy and this bust up between Anthropic, which, by the way, I think is kind of interesting when we're talking about those totemic figures, the US president and the Pope. Those two people have also not been getting along very well at the minute. So it is very much you pick your sides on this. Anthropic has buddied up with the Pope. You've got OpenAI buddying up with Donald Trump. It all fits together in a way that probably isn't very good for any of us.
Are you accusing the Pope and the President of the United States of wanting to be main characters and leading their own little worlds and not having to share the stage? Are you accusing them both of that? How dare you?
I mean, the Pope has some pretty fancy outfits, let's put it that way.
So does the Donald.
The Donald does not have. The Donald sellotapes his tie together. So the Donald does not have that.
As
Sorry,
the
Carolina.
only Italian in this on this podcast, I will say that Donald Trump is quite classless, despite all his funding, and also despite the fact that his wife is very stylish.
I don't think you need to be Italian to say that.
I know, but I'm just using my nationality here to talk about religion and to talk about fashion, and just as a marker of expertise. Clearly, this is why I've been invited. But no, just in terms of
not your doctorate, not your LSE fellowship. Yep, it's definitely
No.
your heritage of knowing about whether or not Donald Trump is stylish or not.
Yeah, I suppose this is what a certain portion of a very Catholic viewership might want to comment to discredit my views. But no, what I wanted to say was that I think what's quite interesting again about the moral code behind Anthropic, and also just in general the fact that they have decided to be different from OpenAI. I think it speaks to technology and technology development and the morality of it all being a market issue at the end of the day, right? And I think similarly, if we bring it back to social media platforms, initially they were very interested in portraying themselves as forces for good, and again, as soon as they realized that if they really were to be that, they would attract a lot more scrutiny, a lot more regulation. They would have to pay a lot more and hire a lot more and face a lot more scrutiny. Well, suddenly they rolled back on that. So even when it comes to Claude, yes, it is different from OpenAI, but how long will that last?
Google's whole "Don't be evil," which the level of actual tagline was never an official tagline, but 'twas ever thus in technology. You're really, really good and benefiting society until you need to make profit, and then suddenly that matters more.
Not to derail us, but "Don't be evil" was literally in the prospectus of Google's IPO. So,
hold on.
To say that this was something that wasn't actually core to their being is not correct. Which is fine. This is Google reflection. Yes,
we're going to Google this as we go because I'm sure that
down is happening.
The code of conduct said do the right thing, but
originally meant as an informal anti-Microsoft rallying cry in 2003, it quickly became a public relations headache. It set an impossible ethical standard for massive advertising.
I don't give a shit if they're presenting it in contrast to another tech company. They still said "Don't be evil."
It feels like another one of those wildly irritating things where we're both right and we're both wrong. So it started out as a
they were still
nonsense thing.
"Don't be evil." Don't be evil. Google has generally applied those words to how we serve our users. Google Code of Conduct is one of the ways we put "Don't be evil" into practice.
So the letters from Google founders were later called the "Don't be evil" manifesto, and it was part of their IPO, but it was never the official corporate philosophy, nor did it ever contain those words. So, damn it.
Don't fight, please.
You did the right of reply just all by yourself. That was fantastic. Thank you very much, Google PR.
Right, good. Carolina, what's your view on this scandalous matter? Or, more importantly, where can users find you? Where can people read your work? Where can people follow your cause?
My view on this matter is that I don't want to come under the wrath of either of you, so I will abstain from this impossible question for once.
We all know the answer. Chris is always right.
True. Chris is always right. No, where can you find me? Well, I'm all over the internet at Blogger on Pole. So my blog is bloggeronpole.com. My Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky are at Blogger on Pole, and I'm on LinkedIn, which I've begrudgingly adopted since deleting my Twitter at Carolina Are. So yeah, you can find me there, and you can see anything blasphemous that I say or post over there. Do not hold Alex or Chris liable for this, although they are promoting me, so maybe they are editors and publishers as much as communication utilities.
We are not promoting, we are platforming you and digging into the veracity of your claims.
We're simply passing it through. It's Section 230 for podcasts.
You even said platforming. Who are you, like Google or Meta? Wow.
Journalists, it's worse. And it has no bearing on the fact we're both friends with you. None at all. Kathleen, thank you so much for your time. And we'll be back to argue some more in 1 second. Welcome back to the final part of Crash, to the questions to which there are no answer, or as it is in my script, it's which is definitely going to catch on. Chris, given the government's growing up in the online world consultation is now closed, what of the floated measures in this consultation will end up in British law?
I don't know. I really don't know. I had a feeling you were going to ask me something about this. And hostage to fortune, 2 or 3 weeks ago, I think I praised the government for kind of getting their stuff together and actually thinking about this in a logical way, looking for evidence by doing trials of how you use social media, and some limiting social media for a group of kids, banning it outright for others, actually doing tests to try and see what works. And suddenly, in the last few days, we've gone to government by vibes again, and effectively trying to figure out what is the most impactful headline that you can get, where it looks like we're now going to get an outright ban on social media for under 16. So I think that is the policy that will happen. I think that's a really dumb policy. It's not evidence-based. It's based off the very valid and very loud concerns of families of those affected who absolutely have the right to raise this as a concern, but absolutely should not be taken as the broad representation of the public and the impact that social media has on this. We don't regulate car seat belts because of the most horrific crashes, or we don't regulate drugs because of the most awful overdoses or things like that. We do on the moderate side.
We kind of do regulate drugs in that way.
Well, but there's an argument that we do that wrong, right? Because there's a very strong argument that actually the classification of drugs is too draconian, things like that. But we tend not to leap to the worst conclusions and then to go from there in terms of that applies to everybody. Harry Dyer, who is a researcher at the University of East Anglia, very good on social media stuff, had a really interesting phrase for this, which was that we're medicalizing social media. Like we're effectively we're treating it like it is something that ought to be considered a medical condition when it's absolutely not. And thinking that you can just kind of cut it out like a cancer doesn't work in this instance. That's profoundish for the question to which there is no answer. So Alex, my question for you, to which there is no answer, let's say you were to become some sort of tin pot despot of a rogue state, don't really mind which. You had the ability to command that AI agent to do what you would. You are supervillain of the world for the day. What would you do?
Why am I a supervillain? I feel like I'd be a shit supervillain because I'd want the potential to which you could disrupt a major nation state's technological infrastructure has already been shown with M&S, with all of these different cyber attacks. But those arguably have taken months of sleeper work, and actually that work had already been done beforehand. But I think I don't want to be a despot ruler. I don't want to be a Machiavellian villain, nor do I wish to use this podcast as a platform. Here is the how-to guide for what criminal activities you could get up to. But I don't want it to be evil. I just want it to be friendly and nice. And I think and in the age of everything, the age of cancellation, wildly overstated, but the age of being taken out of context, not overstated. So the idea of saying something really, really quite vicious, and that being the clip, means I think everybody is right. And also the internet has a terrible sense of humor, and I live in that journalistic fear of having a really quite opinion that's meant to be funny and satirical or playful in a world where I am meant to be also writing serious stories and having no opinion and being away from that. So yeah, sorry, I'm so boring and I'm so sorry. Anyway, Crash is a really popular genre production. Follow us on all your favourite podcast platforms. Title music is from Nuffer. Check them out on all the streamers. Their Riff a Day, as discussed, is unbelievably fun and well worth watching. We're hosted by Acast, assisted by Riverside Studios, and we're published every Thursday morning. Get in touch with us about anything. Alex at crash.org.uk or Chris at crash.org.uk, at Alex or at Stokel on all of the social networks. And if you want to support the podcast, crash.substack.com or search for Crash Podcast wherever you get your podcast. Subscribe and love us, give us all the reviews, and we'll be back next week.